When I was 19, I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsion disorder, OCD. By that time, the disease had already carved its mark into the skin of my hands and left the scars along my back. It had marred my shins and knees and overall left me with a terrible secret. Some things I fear are not meant to be shared. I wondered how much of this story will fall into that category. It is worth saying to those of you who complain about the arrangement of pens on your desk, saying I am so OCD, take a moment to consider my words. Why I have to relate begins when I was around 8 years old. I will leave the sob story out of it for now and say only that I lived in a neglectful, addicted home where I, an only child, could do practically anything I wanted. If you're privy to the matter, I had all of the pre-existing conditions to allow this illness to take hold. My life was unstructured, unpredictable, and marred by a fear of rare but imminent violence, strange men, drugs, alcohol, you get it. The disease first appeared to me as a general nervousness creeped into the recesses of bright and early childhood. I was anxious about people in particular. From the time I was able to talk, my mother has recalled hearing me say, "No, Mommy," say, followed by whatever it was I was so anxious to hear. This is not a clear indicator of OCD, but it seems to track with the tendencies that followed me to the present. My mother had no way of knowing what drove me to make these odd requests. She thought, I believe that I was just trying to get what I wanted. Sometimes she was right. It was the times that I needed her to say no to me, or to say something a second time or a third, that she would have caught on. I wasn't interested in getting things from my mom. I was afraid this is what differentiates OCD from a general borderline illness, or a desire to be in control. If Mom didn't say yes or no at the right time, I was certain that she was going to die. I want you to let that sink in for a bit. Suspend disbelief just for long enough to form the picture. I had a very vivid imagination to my 6 or little 7-year-old mind. If Mom didn't do what I wanted her to do, her face would swell and turn purple, her eyes would darken and lose focus, and her breath was that gurgling rattle that even a child calls death. The truth is that I had seen her in a state not unlike this more than once due to her drugs, and that image appeared in my mind every time that desire occurred. I was sure, and still am, to be frank, that the consequences of one failure could be death of someone that I loved. This is what motivated me to drag myself down beneath the earth, and in no figurative way, to experience the hell that was our odd secret underworld. OCD is one unlike element that contributed to this story, oddly enough. That is the rational part. The other lies in the fact that our little trailer park existed on an outer fringes of what are likely to be countless miles of unexplored tunnels in the Mammoth Cave system. This is where OCD and unfortunate circumstances meet in my life. Imagine an 8-year-old girl, thin and weary, with dirt blonde hair, crawling through the woods on her hands and knees. She is humming a song, dragging a naked Barbie along with her in her left hand. and pulling back the thick weeds with her other to follow a thin little creek. I wasn't concerned about the dirt, nor the germs, nor the messy arrangement of my hair. My jean shorts and t-shirt would be no more stained coming out of these woods than they were going in. That's when suddenly the creek disappeared. The mildness trickle of water stops abruptly, leaving my song to the wind as this curious stream drops into a hole in the ground. The hole was at the base of the hill, and it was only about 5 feet deep. 3 of the walls of the holes were dirt, and the 4th was a stone current on the side of facing me. The creek flowed discreetly into an opening just under the stone curtain. I was a curious child. To me, that cave, could have been the entrance to a magical fairy kingdom, or a buried treasure, or any measure of wonderful things. It was also a gaping mouth at the bottom of a stone face when I crawled into it. I realized it was breathing. Where I sat, legs crossed and Barbie in my lap, I could feel air being sucked into the hole. Something about it unnerved me. It was the same feeling you get when you look into a storm drain, like even entertaining the thought that something could drag you in. I don't exactly remember what happened next, but only that I left in a hurry. Either my mom called me or I heard something, but nonetheless I scrambled out of the hole and ran the whole way back home. This is where the memory kind of picks back up. I was laying in bed and it hit me. I had left my Barbie in the hole in the woods. To a normal child, this would be a problem, and perhaps even a big one. They might cry or become anxious. Not me. I knew, as if it was the verdict of a judge, that if I did not go to get my Barbie, my mother was gonna die. This is even strange for me now. My OCD doesn't usually work this way. Usually it's compelling me towards a task that is right in front of me. Challenging plus consequences equals compulsion. This was more like a sense of unrightness. Something was missing. It needed to be replaced, and now I knew what I had to do. And I knew why I was going to do it. So, that tracks, but something about it calling me out into the woods just doesn't make any sense to me. So, little me and my pajamas made my way to the trailer door, stopping only when I saw the moonlight through the cracks of the blinds. My mother's room was just down the hall. I could check on her and go back to bed for a bit. Standing there, my mind eerily on the door handle, I pictured myself returning to her room once, twice, 3 times. I knew she would be fine. I also believed she wouldn't be. I knew she would be okay in the morning. I also believed from the bottom of my heart that she would be dead right now unless I went. I hope this is as confusing for you as it is for me. You're reading this, so that means I went. The path was not hard to find. Once I reached the creek, it was just a matter of following it to the hole. I should mention the pale street light outside of our trailer. It was bright and ugly, but I thought to myself that it would be a good way to get home if I got lost out there. It was the first of a few odd things which just happened to save my life that night. The woods were much larger and much noisier now that they were ever during the day. I thought for sure that I had passed the hole, stopping to turn back at least twice. Anyone who grew up in or around wilderness has felt this effect. The woods stretched at night. The hole sucked me in. The hole snuck up on me. I had stopped for a 3rd time. Sure, I needed to turn back by now, but when I realized that I was standing at its edge. The thing was much wider, much deeper to me now than it had been just hours before. I lowered myself in and felt for my Barbie. To my dismay, Barbie wasn't there. I searched once, twice, again. The more I fumbled around, the more vivid the image became. Her face was pale, slightly purple around the eyes and lips. Her eyes were shut this time, filled with hollow and shadows. Her mouth was slightly open, and from her lips, a gurgling, rattling breath escaped her. It was her last. That is when I felt the air sucking into the mouth of that stone face again. My stomach twisted at the realization. This thing had sucked Barbie, and I was sure of it. And even more sure was that I had to go in and get her. The deterministic thought was so forceful that it served to alleviate some of my fear. When I approached the opening, crawling on my belly to see, the fear returned in full. It was black. There was no way that I could or would see there. Thankfully, I had come prepared. In my back pocket, I had brought my Cinderella flashlight. Cinderella's crown was semi-transparent plastic, and I remember changing the AA batteries only once from the time I was 4. Now, she shined just brightly enough for me to see the 4 or 5 foot drop to the cave floor. I was a very skinny child, and the opening of the cave was just large enough for me to slide through. Here's the next odd thing which saved my life. I slid in feet first on my belly. The upper lip of the opening caught my shirt and caught me before I was falling to the cave floor. The lower lip carved a fairly deep cut under my right elbow, and it pissed blood. I remember landing on the floor of the cave and just squatting there, crying and bleeding until I convinced myself to look around. No Barbie, that was for sure. The cave went on far beyond the reach of Cinderella's light. I was crouched in the little room with 2 openings to my left. The stream turned and trickled down further into the earth. To my right, the room slanted down like an attic, leaving a sliver of a tunnel in the back right of it. I shined my light around once more, making sure as I could that I wasn't leaving Barbie behind, and I prepared myself to go home. This is my last coherent memory of that night. I'm sure that may be unsatisfying to you. I spent much of my teenage years yamming the story up to people, and a man would come up from the cave, or a demon, or maybe once or twice I explained it was a giant spider. Either way, I spent so much of my life explaining it this way because I thought it was the truth. It was just a horse. I couldn't see it, but that was the sound it made coming up towards me from the tunnel. It was hooves on stone. As a child, I was just too stupid to realize how strange that was. What horse or goat or deer, what would any of those be doing down there? The second part of the story I lied about was what happened. I said that he or she or it attacked me, that I screamed, and I thought I was gonna die. The truth is much stranger. I don't remember. Something came out of the hole, and it scared me so badly that I gave myself the scar on my back and my arms getting away from it. And I have no recollection of what it was. Hooves on stone. Here's what I know. That street light I mentioned before saved me first. Rodney, a neighborhood kid, was outside sneaking a hand-rolled cigarette when I left. And in that pale light he saw me. He thought that was strange, but didn't think much of it. That was until the next morning, when I didn't come to school. I would get myself up and pass his house on my way to the bus stop. And Rodney would be there every morning with his granddad. Rodney got a really bad feeling and told that no one could find me. My mom eventually got out of bed and called the cops. The dogs found the hole, and the man found Barbie just outside of it. I had missed her on my way in. They had to chisel out a good portion of the curtain just to get into the cave, and if not for the blood, they would have had no hope of finding me. I had taken the left turn along the creek instead. I'd gone right, shoving my body head first into the small slanted tunnel as far as I could go. When they pulled me out, the jagged rocks had torn me to shreds. I bled from my knees, elbows, forehead, and God knows where else. I'd been in that tunnel for at least 10 hours, wedged as tightly as I could possibly be. It took 3 hours to get me out, and they used rope, if you know. You know, that was murder. Needless to say, I was in bad shape. I lost much of the story to ambulances and hospitals and flashing sirens, but there's one little bit that keeps me up at night. It haunts my dreams. And when I feel it, it takes me back to time and place without any prior context. I'm crushed between two slabs of sharp rock. Everything hurts, and I can hear it first, hooves on stone. It makes some sound that I can't replay in my head. I can only remember how it felt. There's the sound of something animal, something human. It isn't angry, it isn't malice, it's cooing me. That is the sound, is cooing me like a dove, or a dog, or a mother to her child. And then there's the thing I dread the most. I hear scraping hooves, dragging flesh, falling rock. It is forcing itself in, and then I feel it, a rough, wet tongue across the bottom of my feet, cooing, lapping, cooing, lapping. I wonder how many hours this went on. Finding my mother asleep in the hospital room next to me, breathing deeply, changed me. Not all at once, but I returned there, in my head, well into my adulthood. That's the place I return to when my OCD gets bad again, and I can't leave the house. A voice in my head determined to protect me without any understanding of the world that led me to the cave to save her. She didn't need saving, or at least wouldn't accept saving. It was I, in the end, who needed saving. Somehow the one traumatic memory, the choking, the dying, can be overpowered by the other, hooves on stone. So there you have it. I don't have some silly, if anyone finds this message, to end the story. I have only a warning for those of you who share my odd disease. Remember this, your mind is trying to protect you. It doesn't know how it will supply the effect without the cause, because it was made for a world you don't understand. By the scars on my body, I advise you, do not follow it gently. Do not allow it to drag you into that place. FDR's saying about fear itself was wrong. There are worse things to fear.